Welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to start off our discussion by talking about the very basics of CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's a style sheet language used for describing the presentation of a document written in HTML. What basically that means is that CSS allows us to change style attributes of HTML elements. And that can be things like the color of an element, the background of an element, the borders of an element, and much, much more. First, what we need to do is actually create a CSS file in order to affect those style attributes. So the very basics, as far as the steps we need to take, is we're going to create a file with a .css extension. Then we're going to use CSS syntax to link element tags. Then we're going to add style attribute name value pairs, such as connecting the color attribute to a specific value like red or blue. And then finally, we connect that CSS document to our HTML through a call in the head of the HTML. Now I know that sounds like a lot, but in practice it's actually very simple. Let's get started by heading over to our text editor. Alright, here I am back at the text editor and I have my browser linked to the HTML file. What I'm going to do is just type out HTML, hit enter so it has the autocomplete, and then inside the body I'm going to add a few elements. I'll add a heading 1 and say this is the heading, and then I will add a paragraph, so let's do that as well. And the paragraph will say, let's see a list. Then after that, I'll have an ordered list. And then inside this ordered list, I'll have a few list items, such as item 1, and let's add 2 more items here. Item 2, and then item 3. And then below this ordered list, let's add one more thing. We'll say heading 4. And I'm just going to straight up type heading 4. Okay, I saved that. I'm going to refresh my browser, and now I see this link to the HTML. This is the heading, let's see a list, item 1, 2, and 3, and then heading 4. Now what I'm going to do is try to affect the style properties of these HTML elements using CSS. And the way I do that is first, I need to create a new file. So if I open up my left-hand tab here, notice under this folder, Flask examples, I have basic.html. I'm going to create a new file here, and you can really call this whatever you want. I'm going to call it master.css. Again, the actual name doesn't matter. You just need to make sure that you're ending it with .css. That way, Adam knows that you're talking about a CSS or a style sheet file. Okay, so I have this master.css file. What I want to do is add property value pairs to this. And the general format is the following. You have some sort of selected tag, such as h1. So this is a tag that's in my HTML file. Here I see the h1 tag. And then you have curly braces. So you have open and close curly braces. And then inside of these curly braces, usually you'll see it formatted like this. If you hit enter, you have the open and close. And here is where you have those property value pairs. So for example, one of the really common properties is the color property. So every single HTML element usually has some sort of color property you can mess around with or change. So you have the property, and then you'll say colon, and then the actual value this property should have. So for example, colors can be names or codes. So I'll say blue. And then to end this, I have a semicolon. So that way I know I have this single property value pairing. So let's check this out. I'm going to save this, but you'll notice if I refresh my page, I don't see anything change. And that's because I haven't linked this .css file to my basic.html file. So let's go ahead and show you how you can do that. What you do is inside of this head block, in between the opening head tag and the closing head tag, you're going to start with a link. And you can hit enter here and have it autocomplete this link. I'm going to collapse that sidebar so we can see the whole thing. And basically a link right here is a self-closing tag. Notice it doesn't have a closing tag, it's just a single tag. And we have some sort of relationship attribute, and it's saying style sheet. We want to keep that because this is going to tell the HTML, hey, this link is a style sheet, implement those styles on the HTML. What we need to change is this href. Basically, this is where you provide the file path to your .css file. And right now, I'm just going to say it's under master.css. remember, you're going to need to provide whatever you called your CSS file. You should also note that right now, this master CSS file, if I expand this tab again, it's in the exact same folder location as my HTML file. So that's why I just need to provide its name.css. All right, so let's check this out. I'm going to save those changes in my HTML, and now I should have linked my CSS file successfully to my HTML. I'm going to refresh, and now you should see this is the heading turned blue. So what's actually happening here? Well, the CSS, you're saying grab every h1 element, curly braces, and then change these properties to be these values. And you can check out resources that are linked to you in the resource section of this course, but basically you have resources like W3 Schools and the Mozilla MDN documentation that shows you all the various properties and values you can adjust. We won't be messing with too many properties, but color is one that you probably want to adjust often. Okay, so let's explore how to adjust more property tags or elements inside our HTML. So right now we're affecting every single h1. Let's see if we can affect list items. So I'll say li, open and close parentheses, and then I decide on a property and the value. So I can take in color as a property again, and there's many string codes you can provide as the actual value, but often you're looking for specific colors, maybe not something that you can find in a Crayola box like blue or red. Instead, maybe you want a particular shade. One way to do this is by defining RGB values. So what this stands for are red, green, and blue. So maybe I want a little bit of red in there, 30, and then you can go up to 200, and then maybe I don't want any blue there. So there's a little bit of red and mostly green. I'm going to save that, and then if I save those changes, I'm basically saying grab every li tag. So that's going to be item 1, item 2, and item 3 here, and then affect the colors using this RGB scale. So if I refresh, now I see them turn essentially green. And what I can do is if I want to affect them, I can add maybe some more blue in there. So we'll say 100, save that, and if you refresh, you should see those changes. Now, right now it's not making a big difference, so let's reduce the green to something really small, maybe like 50. Save those changes, refresh, and now I get to see that blue come in. Okay, so another way you can affect colors, and let's do it now with the paragraph tag. Again, we choose the tag that we're trying to affect inside the HTML. I'll say color, and another way you can do this is using a hex code. So you'll just say hashtag and then the hex code. And if you're unfamiliar with choosing RGB or hex code values, come to your browser and search for hex color, and you should see a hex color picker automatically show up in Google. Again, that's just hex color in Google, and you'll see this automatically show up. And now it provides the hex code as well as the RGB code. So you can move this around and choose a color that works for you. So let's try to choose maybe a unique orange. So this one is okay. So I'm going to copy this hex code, and then I'll paste it in here inside my CSS file. And then what I should do is close this off with a semicolon. You'll notice that I didn't close off the one inside the list with a semicolon. Basically, you need to use semicolons when you have more than one property value pairs. So it's always good just to have them in there, even if you only have one property value pair per element. So let's save those changes. We'll head back to our basic HTML, and when I refresh this, now I see the paragraph tag looks like that orange. Let's see a list. Okay, and finally, the last way we can affect color, let's do it on H4, that last heading there. I'll say color, colon, and then I can also use an RGBA value. And basically what this allows you to do is add a fourth value instead of just red, green, blue, a fourth value of transparency. So that's what alpha stands for. So maybe I'll do like 13, 90, 140. And if I just choose 0 here, hit save, and then refresh, you'll notice it looks like heading disappeared, but it's actually still there. It's just fully transparent. So if you only want it to be maybe half transparent, you'll say 0.5, save this, and then when I refresh the page, now I can see that it looks a little transparent. And if I have this fully at 1, save that, and refresh, then it has no transparency. So basically 0 is fully transparent and 1 is fully opaque. So that's a fourth value you can add in case you want your font to maybe color-wise blend into the background a little bit. So that's RGB and then this alpha parameter for transparency. Okay, so that's the very basics of a CSS file. Again, what we have to do is we choose the element that we want to affect inside the HTML. We have these open and close curly braces. We choose the property, and we'll be exploring different properties throughout these lectures, and then you choose a value for that property. Color is one of those properties that has a lot of different types of inputs. Later on, we're going to see other properties that are a little more strict in the type of inputs. Now that's actually a good thing. That way you don't need to remember all these different possibilities. Often what I like to do is just open up that hex color picker, choose a color, and then kind of play around with it. And later on we'll learn about Bootstrap, which has its own default styles. But once you've created this CSS file, all you need to do is make sure that you've linked it to the HTML. So you'll create this link, set the relationship to the string style sheet, which is the default, and then make sure your href is pointing to whatever your CSS file is called. Okay, that's the very basics of creating CSS and linking it to your HTML. We'll see you at the next lecture.